Should we get this party started? Who would like to see some really cool stuff? I am smiling because I have some really cool stuff to show you this year, and it took a team of people. So I think we should get right to it. Hello. This is, I guess, closing out ONA, and it's been an amazing conference this year. Half of you are new, which is spectacular. You should absolutely come back when we're in Denver next year. My name is Amy Webb. 3 quick things about me before we get started. One, I'm a futurist. My specialization is in digital media and emerging technology. What that means is I research trends in the near future and far future space, and I advise organizations on how to prepare and plan for the future. Also, I write books. You will definitely want to be on Twitter for this talk. You'll be happy that you were. I am Webb Media, not Amy Webb. Amy Webb is a realtor in North Carolina. You will find out about deals on new houses if you tweet at her instead. Finally, and this is especially important this year, I do not have any vendor relationships with any of the organizations that I'm speaking about today, and there will be several, and you'll understand why this is important later. So there's no funny business happening. Everything that I'm talking about is because it is a trend that we're following, and whatever it is that I'm talking about is representative of that. This is my 8th Tech Trends talk, so thank you for coming back year after year. It's hard to believe. The first time I did this was back in 2007. And just to give you some perspective, that year something called Goog 411 launched. Did anybody use that? So this is where you could call Google and they would tell you information from the internets. But Google was doing this for a reason. Anybody know why? Just shout it out if you know. Absolutely, it was about voice recognition. So that was way back in 2007. And there was this cool thing that people were talking about called Android, which was just starting to launch. This was the original logo, a team of terrifying looking robots. We'll come back to those in a minute. Also that year, On Being was one of the recipients of an OJA. And it was this amazing cutting edge video series at the Washington Post. And there was also this, did I just lose my connectivity? This little thing called the iPhone that launched, which some of you may have heard about. And this is significant because some of what I'm going to be showing you this year may look a little crazy. People made fun of the iPod at first. They lampooned the iPhone when it came out. So I think it's especially significant because of what I'm going to be talking about this year. But again, this is just to give you some perspective. It's only been 8 years since I was first doing this at ONA, and so much has changed in really a relatively small amount of time. Well, what I'm going to talk about is not what's already happened, but instead what's going to be happening in the next 12 months and what that means for you. Before I do that, a little note on how I've figured out what these trends are. A lot of people talk about my annual predictions. Predictions would imply that I'm some kind of fortune teller. I am not. This is about data-driven forecasting. And futurists, all of them have some kind of process or model that they use. This is mine. So it has to do with observation and reporting, collecting data, building models around that data, theorizing, and then doing testing and sort of forecasting. And visually, it sort of looks a little bit like this. So the process starts out at looking at emerging research, what crazy academics locked in their offices are working on, and people at the fringe, what they're hacking away at, looking for patterns in that, asking questions, tracking where that work is along something called an S-curve, which you'll see a lot, and then figuring out how to take action on that. So I'm going to talk about what's happening in the near future, and more precisely, what you can do about it in the present. So before I do that, I usually use this sort of color-coded scale to help you figure out where I am in my thinking. If you see something that has this red chevron, that means it's early days on this stuff. I know that this will be significant. I just don't know exactly the shape or form that it will take. Anything in the yellow means that I'm certain that this is something to pay attention to. But it may diverge a little bit. It may change very slightly, because there's still some uncertainty right now. And anything green is, this is happening. If you're not on this thing right now, then it's like too late. You've got to get with the picture. And so you're going to look for this in the lower right-hand side of the screen. So having some, there we go. So there are 10 tech trends. Because of time, I'm only going to go through 7. The rest of them will be available for you to download afterwards. The whole presentation is online for you to take and do whatever you want with, except for copy and republish it as your own stuff. Don't do that. Somebody did that once. All right. The first trend is something I talked about last year, and that is cognitive computing. Last year, I talked about it as it was starting to emerge. We talked about the Emu app that was actually only on the market for a couple of weeks before it was acquired by Google. There were several apps that did this, and in fact, we saw many of them either baked into Google Now and Siri or actually coming to market this past year. So what this did was it used semantic analysis. It would go through and sort of automatically schedule things for us. It was a really neat application, again, using the sort of cognitive computing idea. We talked about Jeopardy. And we talked about Watson, which is IBM's cognitive computing platform. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what's happened since then. So IBM has launched this thing called the Personality Insights program. And basically what it does is it tries to understand your intent. It uses linguistic analysis, trying to figure out what your personality is or the personality of whoever you're talking to. And then it makes recommendations on how to tailor that language and customize it for the intended recipient. So rather than personalizing by topic or theme, it's personalizing content based on an individual's character and their personality. So it's making inferences. So basically what that means is it can go through email, it can go through text messages, it can go through social posts. It can also go through things like resumes. The code, for those of you who want to experiment with this, is up on GitHub, and you can sort of play around and test this on your own. But in practical application terms, let me talk to you a little bit about what this does. So let's say that you're in a customer care department, and somebody calls in angry, like me, because a flight's been canceled or something else. Rather than offering me like $100 off my next flight, I'm probably not going to care as much about that as getting home as quickly as possible. It would be able to suss that out just listening to my conversation and knowing about me. There are also cases with resumes. So you know how everybody's been told, don't just send out a single resume to 100 different places. You need to tailor it for each individual hiring manager. So what this does is it looks at the baseline of the people who have been hired at a particular company, of their resumes. It then takes your resume and rewrites it to match theirs. So it sort of reverse engineers the process. It doesn't lie about you, but it changes keywords, it changes the language, it changes the order of things so that you look more qualified. It doesn't change your qualifications, but it makes you more competitive with the rest of the group. Some of you may be familiar with somebody who hacked an online dating site in order to meet her husband. So this sort of does what I was attempting to do by hand. So this is one example. There's another example that uses linguistic and semantic analysis as well as our behavior. And so there's a new app out called Crystal. I know some of you have already experimented with this. It was started by a really smart guy in Nashville. And what it does is it looks through publicly available data to do the same sort of thing. So who is this person and what's most likely going to resonate with her? So this is what it says about me. I'm a gifted communicator, obviously. I make occasional gut decisions against logic, yes. And I prefer big ideas over details. If you want to speak to me, tell a few jokes, make me laugh, emphasize the future, right? And it sort of goes through and details over and over again different ways to catch my attention in the best possible way. That's me. Well, let's say you wanted to contact somebody else. This thing keeps coming out. So Jim Brady. Jim Brady, who is, we all know Jim. He's a longtime board member at O&A. Let's say that I wanted to talk to Jim about something. Well, Jim prioritizes achievement. He likes like a sort of let's go through things in a methodical way. He doesn't like it when somebody makes a decision on his behalf, which is something that I learned because I was a constant pain in the neck when we were on the board together. So Jim is the founder and the CEO of one of the hottest news startups of the entire year, which is Billy Penn. And if you haven't taken a look at it, yes, give it up, seriously. Even if you're not in Philadelphia, it's a great example of how to approach local news, right? But Jim is incredibly busy. So let's say that you wanted to try to get his attention. Rather than just emailing him as you would everybody else, this essentially says, this is the best way to contact Jim if you're going to bother doing that. So write 3 sentences or less, get to the point, don't use super formal language, and that's just for email. If you're a coworker, it has suggestions for that. If you want to speak to him, it has suggestions for that. So this is doing a deep analysis on our personality in order to help us communicate better. Now, one of the things that Crystal has is a plugin for Gmail. And so this is an email that I wrote to Jim that I didn't send because it's a bunch of garbly-gook. But let's say that I wanted to send this message to him. Well, at the bottom, you see a little orange window where it says 4 changes suggested. And what it's doing is it's sort of spell checking my intention. This email is way too long. I need to shorten it. I need to leave out unnecessary phrases. I need to not make the language so flowery. And don't use emoji and exclamation points. And so theoretically, if I do this, Jim is going to pay much more attention to what I'm sending him. Some of you know Juana Summers. She's the new head of politics at Mashable, the first ever editor that they've had. So let's say that you were trying to contact her. So this is her on LinkedIn, and there's also a plugin for LinkedIn. And so it will do the same thing. It will go through and analyze her personality. It'll tell us everything that we need to know about Juana. And then it makes it much easier for us to gain her attention. So what are the implications of this? All of this stuff. The thing is that we know a lot about news consumers because news consumers have mobile phones, and we can take a lot of data about our behaviors from mobile phones. So we know people's schedules, we know where they are, we know how fast they're going, how slow they're going, we know what they read, what they listen to, we know how often they're engaging with your site, we know how often they might be engaging with your digital products, what they click on, what their interests are, who they're friends with, so forth and so on, right? So we already have all of this data. So if you were to put this into the context of cognitive computing, I think what this means, this is my version of an algorithm, but very boiled down. But I think this is what this means. Going forward, personalization won't just be about matching a consumer to her interests, but instead matching a story to how that consumer understands information. So the news story would be put through a personalization algorithm and maybe an activity algorithm. And at the end of it, a reporter would file a single story that would go out potentially 1,000 different ways, that would be personalized for each individual person reading that story. And so, what that means is, let's say I was on the CNN site, and I'm just tired of hearing about Donald Trump. I really am. And let's say that I care so much about him, but maybe I'd be more interested in hearing a story about Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina, right? So what this sort of would do in the short term, this is going to be the first that we see of this. If I'm logged in, CNN would know who I am, it would know my personality, it would start changing the stories, not factually, but it would give different information for me because of who I am and what I'm interested in. So we'll start to see it that way. But in the longer term, what this means is sort of an iTunes version of news distribution. So, Juana is a deeply, political person, so she's going to want all the wonky tech stuff. She's going to want these bigger, more deep stories, lots of details. She's going to want the deep cuts version of the story. In my case, I just want the facts. I don't want commentary or color, and I probably don't want every story to feature Donald Trump. In the case of Jim's incredibly bright, incredibly busy, and so he's going to want a concise 300 words, not because he doesn't like to read a lot, but because he's inundated. So how can we get him just the content that he needs, at this moment? Unless it has to do with Philadelphia, then he might want the longer version, right? So that's sort of what we're talking about. And it's not just length, it's what's in the story. So this is not Apple News. Apple News is really interesting, but Apple News is about the topic. It's not about, it's not about the language. So this is something differently entirely. It's the language that you see versus what and when you see it. So if I were to put this on an S-curve, and this is the way that we sort of track where a trend is and its trajectory, I would say that it's emerging out of the fringe and in a point of first convergence, which is to say that this is the place where a lot of the emerging research is becoming brand new product tests. So this is a good time for all of you to start thinking about this. Personalization crazy algorithm is not 15 years into the future, it's 18 to 24 months into the future. So now is the perfect time for you to start experimenting with this. So what's your key takeaway? Let's find out. There we go. How do you put this trend into action? Experiment with these tools. See what's at the fringe. See what people are working on. There are plenty of APIs that are out there that are available for you to start, getting in the sandbox with and playing with. So see what you might build when it comes to aggressive versioning. The second trend is a little esoteric, but I'm really excited about it, and that is peer-to-peer publishing. So has anybody heard of something called Webb RTC? Who are the nerds in here? Yeah, a few nerds. I love the nerds. So there's this crazy thing called Webb RTC that Google has been pushing heavily since 2012. And the idea with Webb RTC is that it's a lossless video standard. So rather than going through lots of intermediaries and processing and unbundling things, it's a way of connecting just one person to another person via a browser and having the video and the audio and everything else work seamlessly. And so it replaces the plugins that are currently being used. So you can actually use this right now. This is the first implementation of it. It's called Apt RTC. And this is my poor husband, who's the guinea pig in our house, and me saying, will you please just participate for 2 seconds? But basically, I was able to connect to him without using any software, without using any special codes. It's secure. It's secure, especially in our house, because we have crazy firewalls. But it's browser to browser. And there was no lag. There was no loss. It was a better video experience than Hangouts, which was already pretty good, and basically every other video service that I've tried. So that's pretty cool. All right, but here's what this implies. So if you have browsers talking to each other, not all the browsers. Sad. Internet Explorer. Nobody loves Internet Explorer anymore. Is anybody in here building for Internet Explorer testing? Don't raise your hands. We will all make fun of you. And also sad, poor Skype. This is going to pose a big problem for Skype when this starts happening. So WebRTC is this new standard. And while it allows you to do video calls, the other really interesting thing is that without a plugin or an intermediary, there are suddenly huge opportunities for web, for mobile, for the Internet of Things. Let me show you one sort of example. One thing that you might be able to do is to push content between browsers. So let's go back to Donald Trump. For somebody who doesn't like Donald Trump, I seem to be talking about him a lot today. But let's say there was this video on the website, and he's bloviating about, whatever. And it makes me think of, I sort of remember at one point he was on Saturday Night Live in a chicken suit. Let's say that one of the things CNN could do would be to have a sort of programmed second screen experience. So I'm watching this on my computer, I'm watching the live stream, I could have my phone out, and they could push content to my phone. Okay, so for example, it might be something like this, right? A slideshow of photos of Donald Trump past, right? It could be something like that. So there's this interplay and this sort of very interesting, malleable, sort of very fluid browser-to-browser experience, which would enable multiple screens, potentially. Or let's say you're watching the Emmy Awards, and there were a lot of shows that I had never heard of before because I have a 5-year-old and I've stopped watching television. But let's say Amy Schumer won, and let's say you're sitting with a bunch of people and they had never seen the Amy Schumer show. One of the things that this allows, again, is the Emmy Awards could push content, for example, to your iPad. And while it's there, when the person is being when the speech is going, they could send the video of whatever the episode was that it was nominated for so that you could see that clip right? So that becomes a very useful, real-time, lossless, really interesting way to present that content without all of the usual problems. Now that's one way to think about this. The other one, it has to do with BitTorrent. So how many people in here know what BitTorrent is, right? And that's because, keep your hands up, all of y'all have downloaded things illegally, right? We all know that's what's happening. So torrent files include information for how to download bigger files using this thing called a BitTorrent protocol. And BitTorrent is a way to connect us without centralized servers, right? And it distributes data in a very democratized way. In its essence, it is how the internet started, right? It's the way we got started with this. So if you've ever downloaded, not that I have done this, but not that you have done this, but you've probably heard of people who have used torrent sites to download, Mr. Robot or something to watch. So that's probably what you're familiar with. Here's the next project that those guys are working on. It's called Project Maelstrom. And Project Maelstrom is an internet that only exists between browsers, okay? So this is what it looks like. Right, and nobody's using it yet because it's brand new. So there's only 49 people or 50 people at this point in time. But the content doesn't live in a single place. The content lives, just like torrent files, right? So the more people that join, the bigger that network grows. When people go offline, you're not able to see it. Now, so anyhow, this is what that looks like in practice. There's some just very early days on this. But if you think about it, what this essentially means is that without any intermediaries, you can't shut down somebody's news site, right? So because the content doesn't live on some server somewhere or a server farm somewhere, it lives with the people who are using it. And the more people that view the site, the more that data gets distributed. This is significant because it means the end of DDoS attacks. In countries where there is no free press, like Turkey, which has had a really rough year, it means that the government can't come in and shut down the free press. So on the other hand, it means that you can't see the content unless you're using this system. So it's not totally foolproof. But there are big implications here for journalism, especially journalists overseas. And the least of that has to do with, it's the kind of thing that would enable a free press. Because if the news truly is democratized and if it is truly distributed, there's no way to shut it down. Now, the problem with that is it's also hard to remove incorrect information because there is no central place. And it also means that editing in real time would be a little problematic. And if there was harassment, there's a potential for that to be a little bit more difficult to deal with too. But given the benefits, I think that this is something that has big promise for countries where a free press is not as free as it should be. So, and also, everybody's moaning about ad blocking. Once we're in a peer-to-peer system and we're gonna start seeing more of these things pop up, this is gonna make today's ad blocking controversy look like Bam Bam, slugging around his club. It's gonna look ridiculous. So we are at the beginning of this. This is just sort of emerging from the fringe. And I think that over the next probably 2 years, we're gonna see this scale up and we're gonna see more direct peer-to-peer publishing. So how do you put this trend into action? Start experimenting with Webb RTC. New York Magazine is gonna be doing something pretty cool, I know, in the next couple of weeks with it. You can experiment with that, experiment with Project Maelstrom, free to download, and start thinking through the implications of this sort of peer-to-peer publishing. All right, the third trend has to do with recognition. This is the part where I scare you. So, so one way that algorithms recognize us is through simple stuff like photos. So this is something called Pictograph, which some of you may have played with so far. Here's my Instagram photos. And basically what it's done is it's gone through and sorted all of them. It's recognized what's inside of those photos, labeled them, and then quantified them. It was built by my friend Hillary Mason, who I know a lot of you know, as a sort of experiment. This is, you can hear her say this, we're making the coming robot apocalypse fun and friendly. And so this is what it looks like. So this is, I take a lot of pictures apparently of my husband and I wearing sunglasses, and at sporting events. I'm not super into sports, so I guess I tend to take just a lot of photos because I've got nothing else to pay attention to. Anyhow, so it goes through and it categorizes and it sorts all of these images, and sometimes the results are kind of silly, but the point of this is that she's using, so Pictograph uses a deep learning algorithm trained on the ImageNet data set to recognize what's in the photos, and then a lexical database called WordNet to tag the photos. And this was just something that they sort of built on a lark, okay? So in the field of recognition, we can recognize what's in photos, and I showed you that just to demonstrate that this is not something that only Google does. This is something that anybody with the right knowledge can do. There's some emerging research out of India that uses keystrokes to recognize who individual people are, right? So it turns out that when we type things on a keyboard, we each type in a way that is unique to us. And as it turns out, no two people, this should start scaring the hell out of some of you, no two people type the same way. And so what they've done is they've used deep learning on keystroke style, okay? And so as I'm typing this on my keyboard, it doesn't actually matter what I'm typing. They're able to scrape the information and over time identify me every time I sit down to type something, right, without having any other information, which is terrifying. Keystrokes, as it turns out, measure a deeply human characteristic. And so we can do really interesting stuff with that. Our faces. So it turns out we can recognize you in a pitch black room. And that's because our faces have individual thermal fingerprints, face prints, right? So this is more emerging research. This is out of Germany. And what the researchers there have figured out is that regardless of what your hair looks like, what you're wearing that day, you name it, they can still sort of figure out that that's you and image you, again, even if you're in complete darkness and there's no other identifying characteristic. And then there's another team of researchers who are using deep convolutional neural networks to do something that actually you could do yourselves. So it's easy to recognize a person's face if you're really up close and they use a lot of social media, right? And you can just do a Google image search on them. But what happens if you're at a huge crowd of people and you want to recognize somebody? Like, where's Waldo? Anybody see him? Take a second while my clicker reconnects itself. See him yet? There he is. Okay, that's not who I want you to look at. Let's say if you wanted to recognize, let me just go back over here and do it, that person. Can't see her very well, right? So let me zoom up on her. There she is. So we've got half of a fuzzy face. Let's say that for whatever reason you wanted to know who that was. I wanted to know who that was myself. So I ran her through this system that I'm talking about. And here's what we know. This is Karen B. She's from British Columbia. I know her address. I know her phone number. I know where she's traveled. I know that she's in a domestic partnership with a guy named Doug for 8 years. This is Doug. All right. And if you stop for a moment to think about what's just happened, this was a massive crowd of anonymous people. I had half of a blurry face, right? And I was able to figure out all of this information. So what this points to is, in the sort of space of recognition, there are lots of tools that are available to you. This is data mining now via photos, right? So this is a whole new area for 2016 for you to start looking at and looking into. What this also points towards is some new opportunities in real-time fact-checking. So the Washington Post, there was a great first attempt, and they got a Knight prototype grant for this, where reporters would add in fact-checking information ahead of time with certain speeches. You could sync with the speech playback to sort of, in real time, see whether or not whatever the politician was saying, whether or not it was correct. Here's what I think we're going to see in 2016, and here's where your opportunity is. You can use speech recognition algorithms. You can use face and image recognition algorithms. You can use natural language processing, calls back to a database, and think about probabilities. So not, yes, this is correct, no, this isn't correct. That's going to be hard to do. But you could say, we're 80% sure that this is what just got said, or this is what's in the photo, and we are 80% sure, that this is correct, right? That's the kind of thing that you could do going into the next election. In fact, I sort of just did this as a lark. So I ran this video of Donald Trump. I had my phone out. I used Google, the microphone function, and it pulled up and what he was saying in real time. Right, so you can sort of kind of do this right now. Obviously, this is after the fact, but this is the kind of thing that your newsroom could be building now for next November. So here's where we are. This is already past convergence. It's past those first movers who have already started to build stuff. We're moving towards a tipping point. So now is the time for your news organization to start working with these recognition systems for investigative reporting for all the different beats. How do you put this into action? Start thinking about how you harness this trend and think about what reporting and real-time fact-checking might look like. The fourth trend is social reporting. So this is Signal from Facebook. Has anybody started playing with this yet? So they've just launched it. It will be out, I think, to reporters. I probably shouldn't misspeak here. I don't know when, but soon, ostensibly. And it does exactly what it sounds like. So it's a signal, a way for you to listen in to understand what conversations are trending, what people are talking about. And so on the left rail, and you can sort and slice and dice the data in a lot of different ways. So you can see what's trending, what's emerging. On the far right column, you see stories that are verified through Storyful. And in the center column, you see trending posts from something called CrowdTangle. And there's a lot of different ways to look at this data. So at the moment in time when I happen to look at this, Donald Trump is dominating media stories, but I mean, when it comes to Facebook, the conversations are overwhelmingly about him, and very, very little about any of the other candidates. And you can go through and look at this data for anybody. It's really clever and interesting. You can also map it. So I looked at Carly Fiorina, Jeb Bush, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and the Pope. And you can see the whole country is red at this point. So at this point in time, everybody was talking about the Pope. Here's how they're talking about him. You can start to see the content as it emerges and understand where those conversations are going. Excuse me. All right. And then you can also search. So this is O&A. So I searched on O&A. These are emerging photos. Some of you may recognize yourselves. People were excited about Twitter on Facebook. So this is what people have been posting. Now, the center column, as I mentioned, was powered by CrowdTangle. So as it turns out, I think most of your news organizations are probably part of what was the private beta. They've now gone into public beta, and I think last week. And it's a pretty staggeringly cool tool. What this does is it looks through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube feeds to not just figure out what people are talking about right now, but the really, really clever thing is that it benchmarks the content. So for example, this is an NBC News post, and I've circled everything in red, I realize, so it's hard to see what's what. But it's performing 37 times better than the average social post by NBC News. And this is open. This isn't just for NBC to see. This is for anybody to see. So you can start to see that why are certain posts over-indexing or under-indexing when you look at their benchmark, and it starts to tell a story over time. These are the emerging stories that are bubbling up that people are talking about. And this is one about Rand Paul that was really performing well. It's overperforming, again, based on where those posts usually are. This is from his own page. Marco Rubio's not doing so well. I guess the lesson for Marco Rubio is don't post a random post on your Facebook page about getting free stickers and bumper stickers and T-shirts. Nobody cared. So anyhow, but you can track this data in a really interesting way. Let me go back over here. You can also track to see how news organizations are faring. So this is just random tech news. So Mashable, the time that I was looking, was way outperforming The Verge and Gizmodo and Wired when it came to tech news. So here's the interesting thing. I don't think this is just about seeing which social media posts are going viral. I also think that you could sort of use this as a brute force way to figure out some predictive, to do some predictive analysis, to figure out what stories are about to be popular that you could start tracking. In fact, that's what I did before people were talking about certain congressmen boycotting the Pope's visit. I started to see this bubble up in different places, and I knew, just before people were reporting on it, that this was probably going to be a story. So it's a really interesting way to track emerging information. So we've got Signal, we've got CrowdTangle. Facebook also has something called Newswire, which I know some of you have played with. It's another way to sort of suss out and understand what posts are doing well. And in the other corner, we have Twitter. And Twitter has its Curator product, which is still in the process of launching, I think. And it's a tool for journalists. It's the same basic idea to understand what posts are doing well, what's going viral, what to pay attention to. Nikita refuses to show me it, but Twitter has something called Project Lightning, which is going to be launching. This is not it, obviously, but it sounds to me like it'll be similar to Snapchat Discover, so I can't wait to see what it looks like. But again, stories will load as visuals, and I think we'll see something interesting when it comes out. So here's the key change, because some of this stuff may not sound like it's earth-shatteringly different. You've noticed that, with the exception of CrowdTangle, I haven't mentioned any other third-party services. What we're starting to see is that the existing social networks are trying to be more useful for journalists, so they're building these tools into the systems rather than standalone apps. And there are standalone apps that are trying to compete, but these things are part of the existing system, so that's something to pay attention to in the next year. We're way past the beginning of this process and at a tipping point when it comes to social reporting. So what I would say is these are good tools to look at, but don't just relegate them to your social media teams. Especially if you're a newsroom that has CrowdTangle, every single person who's a reporter should be using that tool. And if you have access to Signal, all of the journalists should be using these tools, not just the social teams. And editors should be too. It aids everybody in their reporting. The fifth trend is something called metaverse. So this is the year, next year, that we will officially see, theoretically, the Oculus come to market. We're going to see VR headsets go on sale. How many here have had an opportunity to put on a headset? So it can be a weird experience. A couple months ago, I was playing with somebody's demo, and it was the scene from The Matrix. I am deathly afraid of heights, and so this was not a good experience for me. I mean, it was great, but it was bad. And it was the jump scene, where Neo has to do the jump sequence. And the guy was like, "You're doing great, jump over the wall." And I was like, "I am not going to do that, dude. I'm going to stand at the edge of the wall and try not to look down." It was terrifying, but it was very, very, real. A lot of people talk about lag, and that lag is an issue. Folks that are in this space have gotten pretty good. Lag is actually not the problem when it comes to VR. The problem is headsets. And if you wear glasses, I have pretty bad vision. It's uncomfortable to have the headset on. I don't want to swap out contacts glasses for contacts just to do one single thing. Now, if I was going to do an immersive documentary or an immersive journalism story or something, or a game, then yes, I'm willing to make that sacrifice. But this is a big headset. This is my husband. He's took off his glasses and it was a little blurry for him, but you sort of need to have the whole rig on in order to make it work. For games, absolutely. For live concerts, absolutely. For certain kinds of storytelling, yes. For everyday news, virtual reality, which is part of the metaverse, is probably not exactly what's going to be the best thing for you. There's a really great early project out of Gannett. This is it. And it was a really neat story, about a farm, and it sort of immersed you in that experience. It was a lot of work, and again, I think it was a great way to do immersive storytelling, but I don't think it's going to be worth your investment for everyday stuff. Now, sort of remarkably, you all got a Google Cardboard set as part of your as part of your goodie bags. If you haven't, so don't toss this out or give it to your 16-year-old kid. You need to open up this box and download stuff to your phone and test it out. This is a little bit more, I think, realistic, although you don't get the full effect. So this is something, that I think will be a good intermediary. And just to give you some perspective, it takes a really long time to commercialize this technology. Everybody's talking about virtual reality now, but this is a paper from the late 1990s. It can take 20 years sometimes for technology to reach the individual consumer. Speaking of technology taking a long time, anybody recognize this? So this is Magic Leap. All right, so this is another piece of the metaverse. So Magic Leap requires a headset, but this is about augmented reality. So this is and it's crazy. You put on, glasses and you see, I could see all of you. I could hold out my hands and I could make this elephant sort of appear in my hands and have it interact with me, and it really is sort of stunning and spectacular. But that still requires a headset. Magic Leap's SDK recently launched, so it's something that you can take a look at. But what if there was no headset? What if you could have, as part of the metaverse, a sense of presence, a sense of being there, without having to put something on your head? So Will Sullivan, who's a good friend and knows everything there is to know about mobile, a couple years ago, I remember him coming back from the Mobile World Congress saying, and mentioning something about this crazy-ass technology. He probably didn't say crazy-ass, he probably said something different. But this really cool technology that was a prototype, but it was this little screen, and it was a hologram, like Princess Leia hologram, and he was blown away and he couldn't believe it. And so I've been following that ever since. And as it turns out, this prototype became a real thing, and it is called Leia. It's called Leia 3D, and it hasn't been seen in the wild very much, and that is what's right here on the stage. So, and this is kind of so can one of you guys from the Leia team come up and refresh this? And I'm gonna have Damon Kiso from McClatchy come on stage for us. Damon's the head of mobile at McClatchy and also knows all things mobile. So I'm gonna have Damon, I'm gonna sort of play this in the background. Damon's gonna be looking into this, and there's a camera right in front of him. You might wanna back up a little bit. What's happening is, in addition to this being a hologram, so it looks like it's popping out at you, can you see your face? So he's become avatarized. Here, I can't really stand there. So what's happening is, he's moving his face around, and the avatar is doing in real time what he's doing. Yeah. And is it freaking you out?
Yeah, I look like a monkey.
Well, you're supposed to look like a monkey. You look good as a monkey.
It's good.
Is it, and it looks like it's there, right?
It's doing the eyes, the mouth, everything. Yeah, that's pretty good.
That's pretty awesome. Everybody, please give Damon a hand. Thank you. Thank you. So it's hard to see this rendered, obviously, on the screen. But this is what this thing is. This is not something you can buy, so you can't go out and buy a Leia. Instead, what's going to happen is that this is going to be the technology in our screens. So in your phone, in your dashboard, in your car, in your television, in the things that you use, this is going to be everywhere. And it's not a gimmick. This is not, a gimmick or a toy or something. This is fundamentally changing how we interact. And it's going to be everywhere in the next 2 years. Now, imagine something like this powering on a 3D screen with snowfall, right? So we all saw snowfall. What was so powerful about snowfall were the terrain and the maps, right? Suddenly, if that pops out and it's a hologram and it becomes tangible, it's even that much more powerful. And it doesn't require a headset, right? And it doesn't require a special pair of glasses. It's just on your phone. It just pops up, right? Or it's part of your computer. So here's the cool news, and this is why, again, I'm just going to remind everybody I don't have a relationship with them. So Leia, which has been this top secret project, they are at ONA officially now launching their SDK. So it's now available, finally, which is amazing. And they're going to be in the back on that side of the room afterwards. They've got a bunch of them set up, and you can take a look at the technology and play with it. Like I said, in the next 2 years, we're going to start seeing this stuff in a lot of our screens. So here's why this matters. The metaverse has all of these different ways of changing how we see things. Virtual reality is important, augmented reality is important, and 3D is important as well. They all have value, just in different circumstances. 3D screens have practical use for journalism, and like I said, we're gonna have these screens anyways in the next couple of years, so now's a good time to start playing with them. The metaverse is a way to start thinking conceptually about all of these things, for storytelling, for maps, for data visualization, so forth and so on. So this is a first mover. Google Cardboard is a first mover. So we are, this is happening. The train has left the station. So 2016 especially is a great year to experiment with Cardboard, experiment with AR, experiment with all the different services. You might want to try out the SDK for Leia and see how it works and see how we're going to start perceiving reality differently. So start thinking about immersive storytelling, not just with headsets. All right, the sixth trend is robots. I'm dying of thirst, and it's hot in here. Is it hot? Does anybody feel like it's hot? I don't know where I put my water. Oh, awesome. Well, that's pretty cool. That was good timing. I was really parched. Hey there. Hey, buddy. What's happening? Oh, oops, I went to. Oh my gosh, there's a flower. This is beautiful. It's a Diet Pepsi. To Jim Brady from Relay. That's totally lame. Thanks, Relay. This is for Jim. You're welcome. That's all right. It delivered. It was pretty cool. It still delivered things. So, okay. Oh, thanks, Relay. I'll see you later. All right, Relay's heading home. I guess I'll just stick to this water then. So this is Relay. You've probably seen it out in the hallway a little bit. Bye, Relay. Oop, let me get out of your way. Hey, what's happening? I may have, okay, well, we'll just go around me. So Relay works over Wi-Fi, and it does exactly what you're seeing. So it's already in a few hotels. When you call housekeeping, say that you need a towel or something, rather than a person bringing it to you, Relay will find your room on its own. It'll come up to you, it'll make your delivery, just like you see here, and then it'll sort of, it'll wait, and then it'll go back. And this may not seem like it has an immediate practical application for journalism, but it is an example of, and it's really cool. But here's why this is important and why I wanted to show it to you. There's been a lot of talk about robots in the past year, and this is a great example of how robots will work together with us to assist staff in lots of different kinds of fields. They'll start to assist us in our everyday lives. And you're going to see Relay in hotels, and they're a small company, so I would suspect at some point in lots of different kinds of fields and places. Last year at ONA, I talked about bot-assisted reporting. This year, I want to talk about actual robots assisting with reporting. Now, before everybody groans and says that robots are going to take our jobs, because I'm sure that that's the tweet that's about to go out. Again, this isn't about robots replacing reporters in any way. It's about enhancing what we're doing. So this is about our sort of robot-assisted future. So that was the Savvy Oak Relay. And basically what it means is it's not replacing people at hotels or wherever. It's about better efficiencies. It's making better use of people's time. It's opportunities to collect useful data. It also means that I don't have to answer the door and be awkward in my pajamas, right? When somebody comes, it's a cute little robot. It's not making judgments yet about me. So that's the Savvy Oak Relay. Now, how could you possibly use this for reporting? So as it turns out, I think you can also use robots as multimedia assistants. So this is my house, and I'm using something called Beam. Beam is a telepresence robot. And obviously, there was huge breaking news on the street that day. But it's super gravelly. It's outside. I rigged up my MiFi to it and sort of took it outside onto the street. And these are really terrible conditions for a beam to be in, and yet the whole thing works, just fine, right? So you kind of get the idea. Now, what if we were instead to teleport ourselves into Kansas City? So let's do that right now. Is anybody there? Hey. Oh, there's somebody. Hi. I'm not going to turn on your audio because we're going to have feedback disaster. Oh, there's like, we're beaming to each other. Hey there. And this is hi, this is so awkward, I know. I don't know if you can hear me, but we can't hear you on purpose. Hey, what's up? So can we go see can you hear me? Yeah, can you show me the view out that window? That's really pretty. So I'm just going to follow her around the office. So this is me taking a tour of an office, but let's say that I was out and there was an event like the Republican National Convention, or let's say that there was breaking news like what happened in the riots that happened in Baltimore, right? You could have her, she could be a reporter, I could be another reporter, but I could also be, hi there, beautiful view. I could be recording all of this video, right? So this is like having a camera person, an additional camera person on wheels that allows me to, robot control everything. Oh, wow, you're like on me. You're following me around, other beam. All right, that's totally weird. All right, I'm gonna log off and go back to the presentation. So what we're really talking about, I think, is robot-assisted reporting, right? So you could treat this as a camera bot. You might be able to take video for editing later. You could use this as live video streaming during an event or during breaking news. You could beam a video back to the newsroom for various purposes. There are a lot of news organizations that have distributed teams. So I actually now think that you could also use this as a way to manage staff. So I mentioned the RNC. I covered the RNC a billion years ago when I was a reporter. I could see this being with me, right, and having an editor or a reporter on the other end of this and going around and talking to delegates and interviewing people. I can promise you that people will go up to the beam before they'll go up to a different reporter to talk. And you get all of that information. So you could be interviewing people. You could have a second virtual reporter sit at a desk somewhere and again just report in tandem. These can go into places that are unfit or unsafe for human reporters. And this is also a great way to have people who report into your office have a better sense of place. So since I've been experimenting with this, I used to use Google Hangout or Skype or FaceTime or whatever. This really does give you a sense that you are there with the person in a way that none of these other tools do. And as a result of that, I find that I have much more meaningful meetings. So anyhow, this thing is called a Beam Plus, and there are lots of technical specifications that you can use. I don't think that they are quite. Is there some like weird sound? Is anybody getting like a weird feedback? That's really strange. Let me see if it's my. What's happening? It's like a weird thing. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, look who's here. This is so weird. LaToya Peterson, I never ever get to see. Do you guys know LaToya? Yeah, holler. She's amazing. So she's the founder of Racialicious, and she's also the editor of Digital Voices of Fusion. Hey, what's going on? I haven't seen you in forever.
I know, Amy, we never get to catch up anymore. How are you?
I know, it's so nice to see you.
Yeah, it's great. Like, I had trouble parking, but other than that, got here totally fine.
It's so it's a little awkward because like I'm standing here in front of all these people, but as long as you're here, do you want to tell them about that new project that you're working on with the game stuff?
Oh yeah. So I finally got to do one of my dream projects with Fusion, which is doing a documentary about girl gamers, and it's really fun because we get to talk about not just what's happening to women in the industry, but also history, some trends, just like Amy's doing right now. And Maddie Bryce, who's a game critic that we interviewed, is doing a thing on cyborg theory, which feels really, really relevant right now.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to see it.
Cool, thanks.
So I should probably get back to doing this.
You should.
Yeah, okay, so I'll chat with you later.
Right, we'll catch up in DC, all right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, perfect.
All right, bye, I'll talk to you
Later.
later. Okay. LaToya Peterson, everybody. She's amazing. So, of all the technical complications that could have happened, this clicker is the one that's killing me. So robot assistants like the Savvy Oak Relay and like the Beam, at the moment they probably seem, like the first iPod or like the first iPhone, something cute, but it's probably not going to take off, or when would I ever use this? I promise you, you can mark my words, that this stuff is going to become ubiquitous. You're going to see these things everywhere, and they're going to quickly become indispensable. So, here's where they are. We are past that first mover point. And here's what I think you can start doing. So 2016 is the year to start experimenting. You can start experimenting with telepresence. You can start experimenting with virtual journalism. The best thing to do is to get into the sandbox and try these things out. And I think they're especially useful for, again, for teams who work remotely, or they're really clever ways to sort of parachute in and do some virtual reporting. So because of time, I'm going to skip trends 7, 8, and 9, but they are fully fleshed out in the packet that you can download afterwards. Trend number 7 is the Internet of X things. Like you could start searching on food data, and it's crazy, you should read it. The 8th trend is zero-day exploits, and the 9th trend is media consolidation. So I'm going to skip to the end, which is trend number 10, and that is internet mob justice. So I think it might have been Max Fisher, although I'm not sure, who coined the term internet mob justice. But it's been a remarkable year, right? So we had Gamergate, we had Cecil the Lion, and we had a lot of activity on Reddit. We had somebody post a really stupid tweet on Twitter, and it basically destroyed her life. We had Gamergate and Gawker, wind up having a lot of different issues. The challenge here is that news organizations are in a tricky place, because on the one hand, you have to report on what's happening. On the other hand, the very nature of your reporting makes you a part of what's happening. And as a result of that, news organizations are sometimes unwitting, although sometimes complicit, participants in this idea of internet mob justice, where you have a bunch of people piling on, oftentimes without understanding what's really happening, and oftentimes doing some really, really damaging things, right? Regardless of what you think of Cecil the Lion and the dude who shot, and people who shoot, sporting wild game for fun, the reality is that this was a private practice dentist who had a bunch of people working for him who probably didn't agree with what he was doing, but when everybody piled on and went after him, he had to shut down his office, and a bunch of people, it put a lot of people probably into some real peril for an amount of time. Last March, I was here in LA at a different conference, and I turned on the television while I was getting ready. I was here with my husband. My daughter was home with my in-laws, and I saw this. And I started flipping around channels, and from what I could tell, it looked like Baltimore, where I live, was completely on fire. It looked like the whole place, I'm looking at Twitter, I'm looking at the news, and it looks like my whole town is burning down. So I called home, and I said, is everybody safe? Is everybody okay? And everybody said, well, there's unrest on this street, but nothing else is happening in the rest of the city. But you would never have known that because of the reporting. And it went on throughout the day. And at one point, I looked at Twitter, and some Fox affiliate in Memphis had tweeted out this photo, which started to go viral. And guess what? That wasn't Baltimore, that was Venezuela. All right? So we can kind of laugh about this now, but the problem is that that really screwed up my city. And journalists were a part of what happened, right? I pulled some Twitter data, and I was curious after the fact to see when did the hashtag Baltimore riot start trending, and when was the actual riot, because there was a riot that happened. And it didn't look good. It looked as though people were, especially people in the news business, were tweeting a lot about something that hadn't happened yet. And then there were continued tweets afterwards, rumors of additional violence, rumors of additional mob activity. And as it turns out, there wasn't a lot of additional mob activity. There were a community of people who got together to clean up the city, and sort of that was that. Okay, so here's the challenge. The challenge is that we have a democratized internet. We have a lot of people using social media, and most of the time that's great. Sometimes it doesn't go so well. And so, this sort of internet mob justice trend, unfortunately, we're going to see much, much more of in the coming year. And that means that right now, you need to start having good discussions about ethics. Because this is really difficult. How, as a news organization, are you going to report on this story without adding to it, right, accidentally? And there are new ethical questions that are posed that we haven't had to wrestle with before as journalists. So Now is a good time to do some training around that, to set new guidelines, and to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Thank you. Excuse me. This was a really, really tricky production, so I just wanted to quickly thank the Suitable Tech folks with Beam, who came in to show the Beam, Savioke Relay people, the Leia 3D team. All of that technology is going to be over there afterwards. You can beam into Kansas City. You can check out the Leia. You can have Savioke deliver you drinks. I also wanted to thank Trevor and Jane. I was a massive pain trying to get all this stuff together. I appreciate their help, and C3 Wireless, who created a miracle connecting all of these things together. So thank you. You can download everything here, and I will be here afterwards to take any questions.